Chapter 9 focuses on intercultural communication ethics. So we're going to start off by first discussing what is intercultural communication. Intercultural communication ethics promotes and protects the good of a particular culture, understanding culture as the shaping force behind persons and communities. As intercultural communication ethics cause us to protect and promote a given good of the culture itself. The philosophical first principle of intercultural communication ethics is that culture is a good that shapes individuals and communities, and that this shaping has ethical consequences for persons and communities. Now let's define what the term culture actually means. Culture is the communicative practices, traditions, and stories that give identity to a group or people. Culture is a communicative background that provides meaning and stability to human life, providing an often unexamined sense of ground that makes foreground implementation of given communicative actions sensible within a given culture. And now that we know what the term culture means, we can go into what actual cultural shock is. So, culture shock is defined by the authors as a feeling of disorientation experienced when encountering communicative events disruptive of one's expected routine. So, in layman's terms, a cultural shock completely challenges the cultural norms that you're accustomed to. Now, let's take a moment to explore an example of what culture shock actually is as seen in film. This next film is one of my very favorites. It's Coming to America. The film is based on a prince from a fictional country in Africa called Zamunda. Eddie Murphy plays the royal prince Akeem, and here's a scene where we see his failed attempt to strike up a conversation with his boss, played by John Amos, in order to fit in with the American culture.
Mr. McDowell. What is it? Sir, I was wondering, did you happen to catch the professional football contest on television last night?
No, I didn't.
Oh, it was most exhilarating. The Giants of New York took on the Packers of Green Bay. And in the end, the Giants triumphed by kicking an oblong ball made of pigskin through a big H. It was a most ripping victory.
Son, I'm just gonna tell you this one time.
Yes, sir.
You want to keep working here. Stay off the drugs.
Yes, sir.
This short clip displays two things. First, we see Akeem try to assimilate himself with American culture by trying to find a common ground amongst his boss with the aid of football. It is clear that America is not like Zamunda, so he must attempt to adapt and learn a new way of living if he wants to conquer his goal of finding a queen. Thus, this is where we see the term culture shock. Culture shock occurs when we enter a new environment or culture, one in which we encounter the unfamiliar. Culture shock can take place on the first day of school, the first day at a new job, or as we meet cultures contrary to our own, willingly or unwillingly. Meeting the unfamiliar helps us learn about other cultures while finding out more about our own. The second thing we see in this clip is when Akeem's boss, Mr. Cleo McDowell, looks at him in pure disbelief with regards to how he describes American football. We would describe him as an indweller. Culture at macro and micro levels is often unknown by indwellers, those with birthright connections to a given culture. The reason for their lack of knowledge or awareness is that one usually views the communicative actions of one's own culture as an unreflective norm as the right way of life. One notices one's own culture when learning about another culture through meeting that culture either by one's own initiative or when a stranger comes into our midst and begins to work in a contrasting fashion, countering our cultural assumptions. Now let's take a look at a second clip that focuses on an indweller pretty significantly and see if you can guess which character I'm referring to.
Why don't you take off your jacket, Akeem?
Put it in the face, right? I like this.
Isn't that better?
Yes, thank you very much.
Wearing clothes must be a new experience for you.
Are you able to follow the game, Akeem?
Oh, yes. I'm following the game quite well.
What kind of games are y'all playing after? Chase the monkey.
No, we play football. I believe you call it soccer.
Oh, yeah, right. Soccer. Well, that's a real cute sport. Especially the way y'all bounce that ball off your heads. You know, personally, I don't like any sport where you don't use your hands.
Yes! Yes!
What are you doing? It's just a halftime.
Yes, this is my favorite part of the game. Will you excuse me for a moment, please?
So if you guessed the character of Daryl Jenkins, played by Eric Lassell, was the Indweller, then congrats, you guessed correctly. We see this character not only operate as an antagonistic indweller, but he also demonstrates how private discourse, unlike public, disengages or eschews difference. We experience the inarticulate when we cannot find words to describe our experiences to others. For example, a first-year student may experience the inarticulate when attempting to describe campus experiences to parents or grandparents who never attended a college or university. Sometimes we experience the inarticulate when we attempt to account for what we value, finding the reasons for our ethical positions difficult to express in concrete terms. In conclusion, for a deeper dive, we also see a journal by Adler discuss the transitional experience within the cultural shock paradigm. And this concludes my presentation on culture shock. So for further details, please be sure that you review the information on the conclusion page. Thank you for tuning in.